It's May 5th, 2021, and we're previewing the Mid-Season Invitational with Kelsey Moser. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and we have Kelsey Moser back on the show today to help us get ready for the Mid-Season Invitational. How's it going, Kelsey?
I'm doing great. We finally launched our youth gaming program this morning on our website, so I'm glad that is live. So. Hooray.
Yeah, so that's the Evil Geniuses program, because for anyone who isn't familiar with what you work on, you do collegiate and amateur player development primarily for Evil Geniuses, right?
I do that, and then also working in the space with basically trying to set up programs for high school and in college kids to learn more about esports. So,
yeah, well, I would love to talk more about that, but I really want to focus on MSI, actually, because it starts tomorrow. So we're just going to throw all that out there and say, hey, people can check out Kelsey's Twitter and other places to learn more about that stuff. But MSI is a big deal. So here we are to talk about it. And let's just jump right into it. You know, it's been a little while since we've been on the show, and I'd love to get your opinions on these things. I think the big question that's on a lot of people's minds, or on mine at least, is, you know, are Damwon the favorites, and by how much? So what do you think about that?
So my name is RNG Kelsey. So I'm clearly going to, I actually went over this a lot, and it's difficult to predict RNG because I think that there are primary problems with RNG that people don't really talk about. And that one for me is the mid lane. Most people point to either Xiaohu having a limited pool, which is true, or Gala having a limited pool, which is true. But for me, the biggest problem that's actually going to bother them in the context of how Damwon play, because they seem most comfortable in, you know, they actually actively avoid drafting a winning side laning top, which is probably the best way to beat RNG. And I would say their general strategy is to react to people misplaying side lane and being overextended with really extensive trigger pull. So for me, I actually think they lose to RNG ultimately in an extended series. So
interesting, because RNG is this team where I think you can identify problems with the way they play pretty easily, but you also just can't deny the skill they have in certain areas. And I think especially how well Xiaohu has moved over to the top lane position, what he does there. Breaking into that matchup a little more, because, you know, I think that is a big topic, is, you know, how will that matchup play out? And most people see these two teams as the ones that are, you know, at the front of it. Do you think that this is just a matter of the way their mid games will interact, or does it start earlier than that?
Yeah, I mean, it starts earlier than that for sure, from my opinion, because I think the way that Damwon typically play is that they miss a lot of windows where they need to skirmish around mid, which is where I think RNG have the biggest weakness. And they miss a lot of those windows in matchups like Syndra matchups, Silas matchups, and it's not consistent, right? It's sometimes they hit it, sometimes they don't. It'll be like, for example, on third wave crash, when Silas wants to fight versus a ranged matchup or something like that, the jungle won't be in position, or that will cause the enemy mid laner to get like a very favorable back timing, and they won't be able to challenge that until mid game. I also think that there are some really interesting aspects of how Damwon are playing for Drakes. They rely a lot on face check collapse or having someone be out of position. They also give a lot of waves for neutrals. So for me, this is just kind of RNG's forte, is how they're playing the map, and I would say that Damwon have a lot of holes in that area. Damwon obviously are exceptionally good in fights, and basically for me, it's just if they see someone, like the series that sticks out to me the most is actually the semifinals between HLE, which, by the way, I can't believe was actually the semifinals because HLE were terrible. But whenever Morgan was showing inside and they were pushing out mid, they would always get flanked on, like the moment that he showed on a wave. And I think that's something to consider, because it's like RNG actually actively give mid prio for side lane pressure. So for me, it's just, I think it's an interesting matchup because I feel like RNG will be given everything they want. And if they still lose, then I guess RNG are just bad guys. Like there's nothing else to say there.
Yeah, I think calling out the Damwon in the fights is something that it very much stood out to me as well, especially watching them in the playoffs, and they would sometimes fall behind, right? And they'd fall behind in gold and dragons and so on, but also just in the team comps, like they might be behind with a relatively early game team, and then somehow they find this way to win these 5v5s, to jump, like you said, like somebody a little bit out of position, and they just jump them and they just go for it, and they manufacture these ways to win like 40-minute team fights with a comp that has no business, it seems, winning these team fights. But on the surface, when you look at kind of the fact that LPL teams in general, and I think it's true of RNG this year, they love to take fights a lot of the time, right? They like to sometimes funnel into jungle chokes when they shouldn't and just go aggressive and go after it. But they're used to fighting a lot and executing in those fights. So I think it's possible to look at Damwon and say
RNG suck at team fighting. I just want to throw that out there. Like RNG actually actively avoid the fights where I think that they should have advantages sometimes when they're in even numbered situations, because I think they just don't have that much active faith in their ability to execute them. It's really they actively kind of seek numbers advantage situations more than anything. I do think that in playoffs we saw a little bit more of them taking like these types of fights, just because they do have like a Gala was performing better, but I think it'll really kind of depend on those circumstances. So.
Yeah, because I think like it's possible to look at them and say maybe they weren't challenged the way they could have been in some of those team fighting scenarios, and make that just what led me to wonder if they're going to get challenged more in those 5v5s than they had been at home. But doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to be the case. I think it'll come more down to, can anybody attack them better than they were attacked more in the early game and so on. Because especially for people who haven't watched Damwon this split as much, which
or just play the map better in mid game. Because I would say Damwon's map play got better, but not in mid game. But not, it was always like their flaw. I would say at Worlds, and you saw teams like Suning going for 1-3-1 comps. You saw them play a Fiora comp really terribly. So for me, I guess it's not like, I think the misconception is early game or team fights, and RNG is not that team. Either of those teams. RNG will play the early game like pretty well, but they don't play mid game just to fight, which I know that's a crazy concept in North America, but that is how they do it.
Yeah, seeing teams that are willing to back off from fights is something that's pretty cool. Because and I think I noticed that a little bit in Damwon myself, that there were fights that they would back off from, and especially comparing to watching. I watched a handful of series of them. I watched their playoffs, of course, and then I watched a handful of series in the regular season. And comparing their early split games to their playoffs games, and the number of bad fights that they would like opt into at Herald, for example. It was so bad on the start of the split, and then actually not bad in the playoffs, from what I saw.
It was terrible in the playoffs.
Was it? I saw them back off fights.
Damwon? Yeah. I actually have in my notes, is there something in the LCK contracts that require teams to fight at Rift? And I think it's like every single game I watched, both teams would rotate for the Rift, and Damwon would give up waves to do it. They would take it. They consistently drafted comps that would win those fights, though. But they did take them, and I noted down games where they lost those fights. So for me, it was just like that is the biggest thing that got them back into games after bad early games, were those Rift fights. It was just weird because I felt like I did like a tier list of Rift play, and I actually felt like the LEC teams did Rift play the best, followed by LPL, then like LCK and NA were equally bad. So that's kind of where I was on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I didn't see it the same way, but there are certain fights, for example, where Damwon would, like, they definitely rotated it for it. Like I completely agree. I saw that as well. But there were scenarios where I thought, like, I guess they tried to take the fight, but maybe it was a little bit the other team backing off, that Damwon are trying to create the fight. But then they, I'm just thinking one specific scenario, particularly just because I was watching the clip of it. they were trying to engage, the other team didn't, and then they realized, you know what, okay, we got control, but we don't need to commit. And maybe it was more of a tempo call than it was a lack of fighting call. But
I also like there were some fights where everyone would rotate and then they wouldn't fight, but the fight that to me was as egregious just because it was like, why?
You invested all that.
You're giving up tempo on the opposite side of the map where you had control, and you're going for rift. So for me, I guess like when I'm talking about the rift plays, both of these scenarios are pretty egregious to me. So that's why good. I found the LCK rift setups to be pretty bad. Yeah.
So putting all this together, sounds like you favor RNG over Damwon to win the whole thing.
Yes, I do think that it's not like completely straightforward, and I felt bad for predicting it, but just for me, it was like I think this is one of the times where I think you can actively debate about the meta going into an international tournament. And what I mean by this is I would say that when I was watching the major series of basically every team, a major playoff series of every region except for LPL, there was so little emphasis on controlling the map through side lanes. And there's some exceptions to this, because I think Mad Lions were doing some creative things, but then they'd burn their tempo and everyone would 5v5 face check the dragon anyway. But they would at least have like some creative or smart setups going into that. I would say that Damwon did have some good control, but they consistently drafted compositions that wouldn't give them side lane control, right? Which forced them to basically give side lane control or tempo to go to neutrals. But then you watch the LPL series, and even teams that weren't RNG, right, and played way more for fights or that type of approach, you saw those teams that could get consistent side lane control by playing champions like Akali, champions like Jace being so high prio. Those teams were the ones that would win, like even versus like EDG, even EDG FPX, even in Top Esports EDG series, right? The thing that was winning was the fact that they could get sideline pressure, so they rotated to the fights first. They could set up the fight how they wanted in the way they wanted, and then punish the second team's approach. So for me, that was way less of a factor in LCS. It was way less of a factor in PCS in the series that I was able to see. Definitely not a factor in most of the minor region games. Way less of a factor in LEC, LCK, and yeah, I think I already said LCS, but it deserves to be said twice because of how little of a factor it was. So there you go.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think Khan did play Jace maybe a couple of times, but like that was one of the big differences that Damwon have gone through.
Can you link me the game? Because
I'll look it up while we talk. But like obviously it wasn't part of his typical playstyle, right? Like it wasn't a normal thing that he would do. And that's a huge difference from when they had Nuguri, right? Because Nuguri, he played entirely that type of champion, like win lane push, get side lane control and move to team fights, or just straight up hard split push. And Khan played 18 games of Scion. How much do you think that played into kind of the way they would approach some of these dragon fights or objective things, that they had the Scion to kind of, you can face check anything. You can just ult in there if you want. Like you can kind of cheat this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I would say, again, I think their approach was more along the lines of if someone shows inside, we will engage on them mid, right? But if you don't walk up mid, right, if you're consistently giving, so you can set up the map such that you are getting pressure in two sides and juggling that pressure, so you can test mid prio less. We'd need like a rift kit to visualize it. But the point is that like if you set up the map like this, then they will collapse to one side or the other, which will allow you to make play even if the person in the one side lane dies. And this is a style of play that I would say people have kind of abandoned just because of the importance of dragon stacking. Yeah. So that's where I find RNG like so compelling and interesting, because it's almost like a style of play that people think is not viable just because you have to fight dragons or get soul or whatever you want to do. But they will continuously give that up so that they can have like strong side lane positioning and they can take like later drakes. So
yeah, And that's something that I've always personally appreciated, is giving up the first couple of dragons and getting a gold lead so you can take the later ones. Like, I don't know. I've been a champion of that idea for quite a while. Khan did not play Jace at all this split. He did play Quinn once. Lulu. But no, I was remembering incorrectly.
Yeah, I remember he played Renekton, but I was actively looking, and I was like, okay, there's a GP game. Yeah. There's almost, and then I kept looking at the top matchups. Like almost all of these matchups lose side pressure in mid game, and I watched the ones that did not.
Well, like two. And you have these champions that are kind of like that are matchup dependent, right? Like Gnar, even Renekton. You know, you get prio depending on game state and champion matchup and all that kind of stuff. So even when you play,
just itemization. Like eventually, pretty much most stages of the game, like the matchups that he had did not get prio. In side lane or in lane. So,
and that's where you need that context on top of just looking at the champion pool. Like 8 games in Gnar, maybe he got side lane. Well, not necessarily. And you know, in looking at the rest, probably not.
Yeah, Gnar is a dog side laner, but that's okay.
But you know, all of that aside, you know, I think there are also some positive things that I think are worth highlighting. Like when Khan did play the Scion, some of the CC he was able to land in team fights and the space he was able to occupy, I was pretty impressed with. Not to say that he's, you know, I think Xiaohu should be probably looked at as a stronger overall top laner than Khan right now. But I think it's easy to put Khan alongside Nuguri and get a super negative opinion of him just in general. But I think that could be a little unfair.
So Xiaohu's weird.
Yeah.
Because I would say he's really good at things that you wouldn't necessarily consider top laners are good at, but he's very good at the side lane control. And he's very good at punishing trade windows. But I would say his wave management is poor and his champion pool is poor. So it's hard for me to say that, you know, he's a better top laner than Khan overall.
Apples and oranges a bit.
I just think that RNG don't win if he's a different top laner, just because they just don't have the. I just don't know how else they can. You know, it's an interesting thing for sure.
Yeah.
Also, Ming is the Lord and Savior of us all.
Yes.
That's beside the point.
I love the support matchup in these two teams because I think Ming and Beryl are both super good players. I think Ming, you know, all around a little more kind of in a bit more of a stable way, and Beryl does kind of unique things with all the Senna, you know, alongside Senna picks he'll the Cho'Gath and the Heimerdinger and then just, you know, standard Tahm Kench and stuff like that. But man, Beryl is great. His Cho'Gath
is cracked, but I was disappointed in his Braum as a Braum connoisseur. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, there's so much skill expression in Braum, right? You just gotta know. There definitely is good stuff you can do with it. But you know, I think mid lane also is one that I think Cryan is obviously a relatively new player on the scene compared to, like, he's been around, right? But
he's the weakest mid laner of the top 4 teams.
And then you have Showmaker on the other side, who, depending on what you value, you know, you can look at him as the best or the second best mid laner in LCK. I personally value the types of things Showmaker brings more than I value Chovy, but we're not going to make this a Chovy episode. But where do you think the difference, you know, if you say that Cryan is a weaker mid laner, where does that difference stack up against the kinds of things Showmaker does?
I think champion pool and agency, I think it was Frost when I did the pre-finals podcast, was he's never gonna be the one who sets up the dominoes, you know, he's just gonna sometimes be there to knock him over. Like this player, he doesn't create a lot of winning situations himself. And the other element of that is just champion pool. There were points where his champion pool was pinched such that they were blinding Corki.
Yeah.
And I think his champion pool is basically just control mages, scaling mages effectively. And the way I see the meta kind of pivoting or trending more is a lot more around these like mid-jungle skirmish picks. And so that's why I was actively looking at Damwon games when I was looking at the VOD review to see how well they handled those windows where they could take an active skirmish. Because I definitely think both Canyon and Showmaker I don't know why I said anyway, had the champion pools to do that. But I think it'll be kind of an issue of like what games will they and what games won't they? Because that's for me the easiest way that they have to kind of open the map or just get an advantage over RNG that's basically completely uncontestable for them. So
yeah, I mean, so many mids play stuff like Renekton these days, and a lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of LPL mids play the Renekton, right? And Showmaker does, and that kind of flex.
Even Cryan has played it.
Has it?
Yeah.
But we'll leave that one without comment.
That's all I'm gonna say on that. So yeah.
How do you think these teams, like we talked a lot about the head-to-head between Damwon and RNG. There obviously are a lot of other teams in this event. Which of them do you think is more resilient against what teams like Mad Lions or Cloud9 are going to bring against them?
Which is more resilient against teams like what? I guess resilient in general. It's an interesting question because that supposes that those teams are going to, I don't know, bombard them with things that they can't deal with. But I guess in terms of which of these two teams will deal better with Mad Lions and Cloud9, I think probably Damwon, just because they'll play more into each other's wheelhouse, right? I think that Cloud9 is actually an interesting matchup versus RNG because they do have a lot of the skirmish style stuff that they were doing down. Very interestingly, RNG versus FBX, RNG were targeting the support pool to avoid a situation where the support had agency for mid lane. And that's because FBX is like trademark calling card is skirmishing 3v3 around mid with mid jungle and support. And I can see Cloud9 doing that. They have all of the right tools to be able to execute that well. We also have a lot of instances where Cloud9 have consistently punished top lane very hard, and that's the best way, in my opinion, to beat RNG, because if Xiaohu can't get consistent side lane pressure, they don't have a way to play the map well. Like Cryan won't serve the same function. So I think that, stylistically speaking, actually C9 are maybe the best matchup versus RNG, but C9 play the mid game really poorly. They have a lot of swaps that I just don't understand. They don't make a lot of good tempo trades. I would say that even within the context of NA, Cloud9's macros suspect. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I think it's going to come a lot down to the coaching matchup of designing good game plans, I think, to beat a team like RNG or Damwon for that matter. I think a lot of people would look at Cloud9's potential against those teams, and they're just going to revert to kind of the basic, I don't think Fudge is good enough to stand up to these, in that, that has been a narrative against C9, I guess I can say, for most of the year. Do you think that's on target at all? Just
Fudge is interesting. Fudge is interesting because I would say that in terms of the escalation of pressure, he has always had an adjustment period. Like coming from OPL to NA, had an adjustment period. Coming from to NA Academy, he had an adjustment period. Going from NA Academy to Stage, he had an adjustment period where he not only looked like he was super far behind and catching up knowledge-wise, but performed poorly. Just really basic bad mistakes. So the exception to that, obviously, is when he was at Worlds with his OPL team. Yeah. And sorry, it was escaping me for a second. So for me, I don't know if that was just like a lower pressure situation for him, or what the thought process, or if there even is logic, or even if this is like a false narrative potentially. But yeah, I'm just curious to see how he'll perform in this newer context as well. But I don't have really high hopes for C9. I just look at the way that they play matchup wise or stylistically in their early game, and I see them being positioned to do to do the things that they need to do to take down RNG well. I would say Mad Lions are a different coin, just because they do have a lot of the same calling cards in terms of just like snowballing bots, rotating for mid control. I don't think that they abuse top lane well enough, though. So that's where I am.
So they might be more kind of like. So matchup is a bit of a challenging thing to talk about because sometimes you want to beat the other team by playing the same way but better, and sometimes it's better to beat them by by kind of inverting your play style of theirs and attacking their weaknesses, that kind of thing. And Damwon being a team, for example, that doesn't play through the top side that much, and if Mad Lions are maybe kind of the same, do you think that helps them in a Damwon matchup, or do you think it's better to attack the weaknesses of a team like Damwon?
Damwon. So I think that Mad are interesting because they do consistent. Like the thing that I would call out for Damwon is again their trigger pull. I would say that Mad Lions are the ones who consistently like overspend sideline tempo. So they'll like there was a moment, I think it was the Rogue series, where they had pushed out top wave all the way. They won a really favorable game around bot. They picked Dragon, and then they had a window to recall and keep controlling the map. But then was it Rogue or G2? I can't remember. But the other team actually ended up just on the map way ahead of them because they delayed their recall and taking topside vision completely, so that they had to face check it. And it was almost a disaster for them. So that's kind of where I am, is that they will set up favorable map states, but they'll make two mistakes, right? They'll either not reinforce that with control that forces the opponent team to retake by putting down wards. So oftentimes, like when you put down wards in one quadrant, the enemy team retakes that, you see them on the map, and then you can immediately rotate and put the wards on the opposite side. So then you're basically trading control for the other control, and you're trading wards as objectives. But they often skip that step, and they just like push out all the way, recall, and they assume that that's like enough of a retake, but the enemy team doesn't necessarily even have to show on the waves, right? The enemy team can show in the jungle or various other states and just kind of rush the vision and then push out the waves. And then there's a situation where that are already forced out. And then of course the other mistake that I already touched on, which was overshowing on waves.
Okay.
And by that is the typical like Twitter complaint of why are they hitting mid tower here? Mad Lions do that all the time. So
okay.
Basically removes mystery, removes control. Their Baron setups are probably almost as bad as C9's, if not worse, actually. So that's kind of Mad Lions for me. I think that they're gonna basically skill check and try to hard snowball. So that can, I think, get them a game maybe against Damwon. But they're not set up to take a series.
What about against RNG? Does the story play out differently there?
I think RNG's bot lane is vulnerable, and I don't think RNG will waste a lot of support pans like they did, or expend a lot of support pans like they did against FPX. But maybe they will after subsequent games. I think that as much as Gala has been overperforming, in my opinion, in playoffs, he's still one of the weaker players. So I kind of want to see if he can keep that trajectory to MSI, and so I have to stop saying that he's overperforming.
Yeah.
But I also think Humanoid is pretty good. Like, he's pretty nuts, right? It's actually really hard for me to decide exactly how I want to rate the top 3 mids at this event. So that's they're pretty close in skill, or at least perks would be if you weren't playing NA solo queue.
He's at a boot camp now. It's gonna be totally fine.
But I guess and he has different things that make him strong than I would say Humanoid and Showmaker. Yeah. But I guess that's. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. But no anyway, worries. Back to you.
Good throw. You should be a host. Do you think the Mad Lions and the changes they've made this year have made them a better team than we saw at Worlds? Because obviously that's a big story for them is how disappointing their play at the World Championships was. Now, 2 roster changes, back winning LEC and making it to the next international tournament. You have to look at that and think their trajectory is upwards, but do you think that's actually the case?
I would say that they're definitely going to show up better than they did at Worlds. So there's that for us, but I still think that they have I think this team is going to remain a team that constantly has growing pains for having like trading in rookies that they're developing, which is not bad, but it just kind of is. And I would say that they're a fun team because I think that they will blow out some early games. For sure. They will skill check you. They'll play some super hard snowballing, and I think that they love the jungle meta because it's more favorable now to script Krugs, look for more lane pressure earlier. You don't lose as much by letting the enemy jungler like invade and deny your Krugs because it probably takes him too much time anyway. So I see them kind of excelling and getting a boost from that. But yeah, so I guess that the short answer is yes, upward trajectory. There you go.
There we go. Of course, we have a lot of other teams at this event other than these top four.
Yep.
Which of the other teams do you think have the best shot to break into this top four and maybe knock somebody out and take their spot in semifinals?
The obvious answer is PCS, right? They basically the PCS team, sorry.
PSG
which
Talon,
is PSG Talon. So in general, I would say that they obviously have the best shot. I do know that they are playing with an 80 sub, but after I had this conversation with Emily, I think the thing about PSG is that they are getting away with doing a lot of weird laning mistakes that they won't get away with against most international teams. And for me, even though their reputation is like they're early, so aggressive, I think the more interesting thing about them is how they're able to flank well and collapse. So I think that's one of the more interesting things for them. They're probably one of the only teams at this event that actually has like steps and macro decision making to set up the map well, other than just like dropping waves and face checking for 5v5s. Which I think is the approach that a lot of the other teams just take. So I don't see them having the other teams doing a whole lot here, like the other 6 teams. It's a little unfortunate, but that's kind of where we are. But it'll be fun to watch, and there's so much, in a lot of ways, there's so much star power on some of these other rosters that will always just consistently make games enjoyable. I think at this point, if you've been consistently watching these international events, you probably know like Anonisic, you probably know White Lotus, and get excited to watch those No Man's, those players all the time. Holy Phoenix is a gigantic throwback. You have Pain Gaming, which is potentially followers and fan base wise, maybe one of the biggest ones if you exclude like RNG. In terms of fan base at the entire event. I love like the Japanese like Twitter fan base is so active. I swear if you tweet about Evie this event, probably your highest interaction tweet the entire event. So I don't know. And then of course like Pentanet, Pabu, the legendary 1v1 god. We took a lot of their OPL stars, but it's still familiar faces like Fire Panther on this roster. So I'm looking forward to just seeing like the pop-off moments or the cool moments that you didn't expect from these teams. And who knows, maybe they like I would say Pentanet is interesting just because they are kind of creative. And I think because of where they are and the expectations that people have from them, if they want to take games, that's sort of where they have to lean.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of looking forward to their games, even though they're probably one of the worst teams skill-wise here. So
yeah, I mean, Oceania had so much of its talent stripped out into NA Academy, right? That there's inevitably going to be some kind of an overall fall off. But we'll see what happens with that, and hopefully they can rebuild that a little bit. Maybe they'll get some of their players back over time, and we'll have to see. Do you think that, speaking of creativity and what some of these teams are going to have to do, and maybe do some unusual picks or unusual strategies or weird level 1 stuff like that, the meta has had a lot of things popping into it in solo queue and so on, or watching in houses, stuff like that have you never know how many of those are going to bleed through into actual competitive play. Do you think things like Lee Sin top and Jungle Morgana and stuff like that is actually going to show up, or is that just more like a solo queue stuff, things people are trying out?
So I think Lee Sin is pretty overtuned. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him show up in a solo lane. It's just a question of whether or not the solo laners feel comfortable playing him, because he does have a lot of skill nuance that you probably have to have a lot of games in him before this patch to pull him out on stage at an international event. I think the Morgana jungle for me, the problem with Morg is her skirmishing ability is pretty bad in the contact. If you miss Q, basically just stand there and give someone a shield and auto attack them. So her clear is so disgusting that she might be able to get level advantages, but that's pretty much where I see Morgana. I don't like her. I'm not as on board the Morgana jungle train as I am the Lee Sin train, I think.
What else is there? What else should we be potentially looking for that might be different or exciting?
A lot of things. Like I said, I'm expecting more like skirmishing mids. I think more people are going to be willing to try stuff like Kali, Kiana.
I've seen some Rumble.
Diana,
especially.
Diana Jungle got nerfed for this patch. Yeah, Rumble is disgusting as well. Rumble will just be flexed everywhere.
Yeah. Could be a lot of things.
All the patches blend together because the last competitive match I watched was on 11.6 and it's already 11.9, so I can't remember exactly.
It is a little weird.
But it's I'm just gonna look at it fast.
We've had 3 patches go in between, but at the same time, like generally, especially going into these events, they try to keep the patches like relatively non-disruptive. But I don't know if they've actually succeeded at that this time. And
there's like the Lulu cog might rear its head, especially versus like the Kaisa pickers.
With a Kog'Maw in the bottom lane.
Especially with like the Kaisa pickers, like Gala, your days are numbered, my friend, you know.
If we can have Lulu and Morgana in the comp with a Kog'Maw, we're not far off of going back to the heyday of competitive LoL with the Juggernaut comps. We're almost there. They just buffed Lux.
Sunfire Aegis better than Chem Tank. That's all I have to say. Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to all that.
Yeah, it'll be. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it. So.
I think something that we have to acknowledge that's really unfortunate about this MSI is, of course, the VCS representative not being able to travel. Do you think GAM would have had a better case than PSG Talon for that top 4 threat? Or did you just not end up really scouting them too much?
More than PSG Talon? I don't think so, no.
No?
So...
Because that's been kind of an open mystery in a sense, since they didn't get to go to Worlds, and now again they don't get to go to MSI. But
you mean the VCS team? Yeah, I think probably they do better, but I didn't really watch them.
Sorry to say
like
that.
Honestly, if I had to guess, right, I would probably say that they did, but I can't guess because I haven't watched them. I haven't, right?
Yeah. It's one of those, once you hear they're not going, then you kind of go, well, okay.
That I didn't bother to VOD review or prepare, which is a shame, right? Because now that I'm thinking about this, I feel a little sad. Because it's like, that's you get exposed, a lot of the international community everywhere gets to exposed to other regions, not just through like watching the international teams, but by doing VOD review prep. And then you aren't just watching the teams that go into MSI, but you're also watching the teams that they played against, the teams that they competed against. And now I feel a little sad, so I might go watch VCS.
Well, and especially with the speed of their play style and all that, which is just that much more fun on stage, right? That you want to see that, because that's just one of those things about this event. You have like a team from Vietnam that comes in and they play just so fast and so much fighting. How is that going to play out? Or you have a team like PSG Talon who lost, I think, a single game in spring, and you go, oh, they're so much better than the rest of the teams in their league. Can they, carry it across, or is that just their league being weak, or whatever it's going to be? Like the same kind of questions were being asked about Damwon last year, and it turned out they really were that good. So you get to see some of those. Not getting to answer some of those questions is too bad, but hopefully we'll see them at Worlds.
Usually, yeah. I mean, usually I would watch. Usually, you kind of get a feel for it just by watching their games. Like, for example, I felt really disappointed in the HLE series.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like the quality of play in that series was depressing. Similarly, but I can't say that that's not true of some of the other series, right? Yeah. As well, like that were internationally played. Like rewatching the Rogue Mad Lion series was also kind of disappointing for me. As much as I actually kind of enjoyed the G2 Mad series, but it was so frustrating to watch. So it was like, if only they didn't think Karma Leona was a lane, maybe this could have been a super banger, So yeah.
Yeah. I gotta say, for my part, watching some of the RNG stuff was impressive, and some of it was not. So some of it was more pulling my hair out. So you get that on all of them. I think that's definitely one interesting thing about this tournament. I think every team, at the top end of it going in, you go, yeah, but are they really that good? Like none of them really have this full package kind of vibe to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it hard to predict.
I think you usually get that at MSI though.
Yeah.
Right? I rarely go into MSI and feel like, yeah, this is final form. This is the team that this is usually as a result of a roster change or something along those lines. But I very rarely feel like a team is a full package team, right?
Sure.
Like even Damwon at Worlds, I was like, so oppressive. But their early game was nuts. Like probably one of the better early game executions we've ever seen in esports. And in League of Legends esports, but they had a lot of Fiesta stuff that made me think like, do these guys are these guys aware of like the timings of top wave versus mid in the middle of the game? Like just small things like this. So there aren't usually full package teams.
Yeah.
In that traditional sense, it's just this idea of like, how good can you get at what you're good at that it feels like you have no flaws. So.
Yeah, well, I think also the deeper you understand the fine nuances of the game over time, the more you are able to identify those weaknesses, and the less capable you become of seeing a team as not having flaws, right? Because it becomes easier to identify flaws at all. And this really tiny flaws start to feel bigger because you're better at recognizing them. So I think that's also a bit of an analyst curse. So it is what it is. We've got some questions from the chat, and you're also able to send these questions in on Patreon ahead of the episode. If you go to patreon.com/oracleselixir, and I post the guests in advance there. So we have a question from Deeliman, who wants to know, who would you call your dark horse to win MSI? So let's say not one of the two favorites, right? Not RNG, not Damwon. Who would be the most likely, or who would you call as a dark horse? It is a relatively small field, so...
Yeah, that's kind of a weird answer. I guess you could argue. I know I'm pretty sure PSG are just going to be like. PSG are kind of a mess, so I think I have to go with Mad Lions as my dark horse then.
Okay. Yeah, and I think a lot of people will just say they're maybe the third team in general, right? So kind of feel like you're just going. So what if we twist it to be a little bit more unique? What's something that you think could happen that would surprise everybody? You just got a little more open ended with it.
Something that I think could happen that would surprise.
Like if we're doing like a 90-50-10 thing, what would be your 10% to happen?
I already did my. I think my pick to win is already surprising to most people.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But the 10% chance of happening? Let me think.
Yeah, I'll let you think on that one a little bit.
Looking at the groups here, I will give a 10% to...
The suspense is killing me.
My goodness. I will give a 10% to Infinity getting out over Cloud9.
Okay.
But that's like, it's extreme because it's a 10%, right? It's something that's like where I only believe that's still a lot, right? It's like 1 out of 10 times. Do I think that's 10%? I don't know.
Never do surprise predictions live, folks.
Yeah, I guess
Plan them in advance.
Istanbul Wildcats over PS. Nah.
Okay, well, those things are low probability to happen. We'll leave it with that.
I'll stick with the Infinity Esports over
Okay.
C91. There we go. Nice.
Following up a little bit kind of on part of what you're talking about, whywhywhyquestionmark wants to know if you think, apparently has been seeing tier lists that have PSG over Mad Lions. I'm not sure exactly where. Do you agree with that? Do you think PSG is or can be better than Mad?
Where are those tier lists? I do not see them. I think I've, without revealing Grim data, people are pretty high on PSG, but so I think that maybe that might be coming from it. But again, for me, like the fundamentals that I've seen are the main fundamentals that I've seen in the gameplay Mad Lions are a little bit more solid. I do think PSG are interesting. Like there's a chance that they're better than C9 for me. I was very like it's always the question mark, right? Like the what if G2 made it thing that I think people are gonna have, which is it sucks because it's not fair to Mad. But it's also definitely, I do feel like this EU rep is weaker than the top EU reps we've had at the last international events. So,
yeah, I think this stuff about tier lists and so on I think it's coming from scrim leaks. I've seen a couple of things that are just off in the back corners of the internet somewhere. Somebody is saying, hey, based on scrims, I think these teams. I think there was on a Chinese forum somewhere that PSG was actually being put above even RNG, which is very surprising, especially on the Chinese forum.
Yeah.
And goes to show, don't trust scrim leaks, or honestly, a lot of times don't trust what pro players say about other pro players.
Or maybe you do trust scrim leaks, right? And PSG just wins MSI. So
maybe.
Raz tweeted PSG and C9 over Mad.
Raz is the one stirring it up. Okay.
Force Without said that had PSG over C9, I'm pretty sure.
All right. We'll see. We'll have to see.
Which I think is more reasonable.
To take a bit of a tangent on that, though, do you so like when it's ever scrim leaks and stuff like that, it comes out of teams or players or pro teams having opinions on other pro players or pro teams, and I've often found that's a pretty unreliable read of the actual quality because they have a very narrow window on that. Do you think that's true, or do you think that generally pro players are a good resource for analyzing other ones?
I think pro players tend to be really kind of results oriented in the moment without thinking about a few things. So it's like they get off a bad day of scrims and then they feel like, oh, this team is just too good, or something like that. So it does tend to be like a little bit emotion charged when they make some predictions or announcements, but I wouldn't say that they have consistently bad analysis. It really just depends on the context in which you're getting the prediction and
sure.
How they justify their answer. So
yeah, I think a lot of the time, they are approaching the question from a set of angles that would be different than a content creator would, for example, based on experiences in scrims, which other people just don't get to see typically, or based on playing against them in solo queue or stuff like that can weight their analysis in a different way, right? And they just aren't going to sit there and spend 8 hours reviewing VODs to come up with their opinion on who the best team going to turn. Like, that's a total waste of their time. So why would they? So you get a different set of perspectives on it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's less accurate or less viable, but I think it should be interpreted. I think you sometimes get fans out there who say, player X said that player Y is actually super amazing, so why are these other people all saying that they're not? And then they just let that trump what other people are saying, just because it's a pro player. So that's my soapbox, I guess. Very miniature soapbox.
So they did have both of them at, like, the reason why I have PSG lower than this is because I do, like, when you watch, like, when the game's hovered over the laning, they make way more fundamental mistakes. So when there are situations where they get a lot of situations where they get early advantages. But I like their flanks and collapses. It's just, I would say that they're not going to get those same advantages if they continue to visualize matchups the way that they have been. So that's why I think there's a lot of inflation on PSG talent. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's wrap it up with one more question here, which is coming from Truth. Wants to know if there are any players that you'd like to call out that you think will surprise people with their performance. And I'd lean that towards positive surprise, but you can go the other direction with it if you feel compelled.
Positive surprise. Yeah, I think, are there any players that I think will surprise with performance? I'm gonna say, honestly, I feel like there are just so many players that we've seen already that we at this event that we kind of get a sense of, okay, this is how they play. I'll say probably the most surprising one for me is going to be, that might be surprising for people in a negative way, is going to be like Gala. And I'll say the most surprising in a positive way for some people, based on, my thing is that I just don't really have a pulse on what the community thinks of players right now. I'm going to be completely honest, because I'm the furthest removed from that I've ever been. I guess if I'm coming at from a perspective of, oh, you've never seen these guys before, there is a nice, like, the Brazilian jungle karaoke. Maybe this is he hasn't really been an international event, but I think he's pretty good. So he might be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I was going to say, that this does entirely depend on what people's expectations are going in the end. So like I think one of them, naturally, my mind goes to Fudge, as it often does in many contexts. And people, just people have set such a low bar, I think, a lot of people, on what they expect from him because of stuff that happened 4 months ago. And I think if people are still in that mindset, then even if he performs just kind of average and holds his own, that'll be a positive surprise. Then again, if people still have that mindset from 4 months ago, they'll just gloss that over anyways and probably still feel bad about him. But that is what it is there. And if people from other regions who haven't watched just go on, everybody says this player is bad, then they're going to get a positive surprise out of that as well. Gala is definitely an interesting shout out, because I think if you only watch his playoffs, you're going to feel like, hey, he's not bad, he's pretty good. But you don't know if that's what you're going to get out of it. So, and I'm looking forward to, like, players like Armut and Elyoya, who I haven't had the most exposure to. I've done some review of them going into MSI, but I'm really, really looking forward to see what they can bring out. Learn a little more about them as well.
Yeah, I'm less high on Armut after watching the playoffs again than I was. I don't really like his Gnar. I'm gonna be blunt on that. But I think that Elyoya can be interesting for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Going to be cognizant of your time, and I know you've got other things that you've got to attend to. So thank you for making the time and joining us on the show today, Kelsey. And can you remind everyone where they can follow your work?
Right. Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter. It's on the screen. But the KARONMOSER for people who are on
audio only.
Listener only.
Yep.
You also follow Evil Geniuses for updates on the team and some of the things that I'm doing. That's in the collegiate side of my name, not the competitive side of my title. And I'm going to be coming out with an episode MSI preview of Making the Rounds with Emily later today. So that'll be fun. Doubling up the content, cannibalizing my appearances here. I think we talk about very different things though, so it's actually kind of cool.
Good.
So
right. Yeah, and if you drop me links for that stuff, I'll make sure to throw it in the show notes there, so that everybody can check that out easily. So thank you to everyone for listening. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/oracleselixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, where we talk about League of Legends, esports, other games, data science, a lot of other topics. So links to all of those will be in the show notes as well. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.